What's flying under the radar right now could end up becoming one of the most important developments of the Patriots offseason, because while most of the attention has been on the draft picks, there's another story quietly building that Patriots fans should not ignore at all, and it revolves around a group of undrafted free agents that may be far more significant than people realize. History says this matters. In 21 of the last 22 seasons, at least one undrafted rookie has made the Patriots 53-man roster. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern, and when you look at what New England brought in after the draft, there are names here that could absolutely fight their way into real roles. The biggest headline starts with Jacob Rizzi out of Florida State, and honestly, this might be one of the most fascinating signings of the entire class. The reaction around him has been simple. How was this player not drafted? When you look at his athletic profile, the numbers stand out immediately. Size, movement, explosiveness, arm length, discipline, it all jumps off the page. But what really makes people pay attention is what he did in pass protection. An 86 pass blocking grade, 0 sacks allowed, only 1 penalty. For an undrafted lineman, those are eye-opening numbers. And when you start thinking about the Patriots' long-term offensive line depth, this is where it gets interesting. There's already conversation that he may not just be a camp body, but a legitimate candidate to push for a roster spot. Some even believe he could be the most likely undrafted player to make the team. And then there's Kyle Dixon, and this is where things get really intriguing because Patriots fans love underdog stories. Coming out of Culver Stockton, he may not have played at the highest level, but the production is impossible to ignore. Oversight 200 yards in 2025, 83 catches last season, 24 touchdowns over his final 2 years. Those are absurd numbers. Yes, there will be questions about level of competition, but when a player dominates that thoroughly, scouts take notice. There is a real belief he could become a surprise fan favorite in camp. Every year there is one receiver who arrives out of nowhere and starts turning heads. Dixon feels like he could be that guy, and don't overlook Channing Canada out of TCU, because this signing may be more important than people realize. The Patriots need depth in the secondary, and Canada brings athleticism that fits what New England often looks for. Speed is there, explosiveness is there, experience is there with 38 career games played, 2 interceptions last season. He may not be walking in as a headline player, but as a developmental corner with upside, this could quietly be one of the smartest pickups in the class. What makes this whole undrafted group fascinating is it doesn't feel random. It feels targeted. It feels like the Patriots identified traits, toughness, discipline, athletic upside, versatility. That matters. Then you move deeper into the receiver group and you see Nick DeGennaro, another player who could fight through special teams. Maybe not the flashiest signing, but averaging nearly 18 yards per catch shows big playability. Those are the kinds of players who can make coaches pay attention in preseason. Miles Montgomery is another name worth monitoring even in a crowded running back room. On paper, you might think he gets buried, but power backs who can contribute in multiple phases sometimes carve out unexpected opportunities. Nearly 700 rushing yards, almost 5 yards per carry, plus receiving ability. He may have a steep path, but he's not someone to dismiss. And one of the more interesting evaluations may be Cameron Dorner. There are concerns about top-end speed, yes, but reliable hands matter. Only 1 drop last year. 8 touchdowns, over 900 receiving yards. Sometimes players lacking elite athletic traits still stick because they simply catch everything. Coaches notice that. What stands out most is the Patriots didn't just bring in names. They brought in competition. And that competition matters because this roster still has spots to fight for. We've seen undrafted players become contributors in New England before. We've seen overlooked players become roster surprises. And history says it could happen again. There are other names worth discussing too. Tanner Arkin, Jimmy Kibble, Jandarius Morgan, David Blade Jr., each bringing something different to camps. But what's becoming clear is this class may be stronger at the top than people initially realized, especially with players like Rizzi, Dixon, and Canada generating early buzz. And maybe the biggest storyline in all of this is whether the Patriots found another hidden gem before anyone else caught on. Because if even 1 or 2 of these players hit, this undrafted class could end up being remembered as one of the sneaky sneakiest important parts of the offseason. Right now, the big question is this. If history says at least one undrafted Patriot usually makes the roster, which of these names do you think has the best chance to be that player? And this is where the story gets even more interesting, because when you dig deeper into this class, you start realizing the Patriots may not just be looking for one surprise roster addition. They may be building competition across multiple positions, and that is where things can change quickly once rookie minicamp and training camp begin. Take the offensive line again, because that battle may end up being one of the most important storylines to watch. Jacob Risey keeps coming up for a reason. It is not just the athletic profile or the pass protection numbers anymore. It is the possibility that New England may have found a developmental lineman with legitimate upside in a place where teams rarely expect instant value. And if there is one thing this organization has historically valued, it is offensive linemen who can be developed internally. That is why his name continues gaining traction. But what if he is not the only surprise? Because Kyle Dixon may be the type of player who turns preseason into must-watch football. Patriots fans know how quickly a lesser-known receiver can become a camp sensation. One big practice, one explosive preseason game, one touchdown in a joint session, and suddenly everyone is talking. And with his production profile, that possibility feels real. If he proves he can translate those playmaking traits against NFL competition, he may force difficult decisions, and Channing Canada may have a real shot to do the same on defense. Depth at corner matters over a long season. Injuries happen, rotations change, special teams value becomes critical. Players who can contribute in multiple ways often survive roster cuts, and that is why his path may be more realistic than some realize. Then there is a bigger layer to all of this that Patriots fans should be paying attention to. Competition often creates unexpected winners. Sometimes an undrafted player does not make the final 53 immediately, but forces his way onto the practice squad and becomes a midseason call-up. Sometimes a player flashes enough that the team simply cannot risk losing him. That has happened before in New England, and that is why names like Cameron Dorner and Nick DeGennaro remain fascinating. Dorner's reliable hands could make him a quarterback favorite in camp. DeGennaro's big playability and special teams potential give him an avenue. These are the kinds of players who may not dominate headlines today, but could absolutely become August stories everyone is talking about. Even some of the less talked about additions bring intrigue. Jimmy Kibble's leadership profile as a team captain matters. Jandarius Morgan offers line depth. David Blade Jr. may have developmental traits the coaching staff believes it can unlock. This is where scouting and coaching often matter more than draft status. And honestly, that may be the biggest takeaway from this entire undrafted class. It feels like the Patriots targeted upside, not just camp bodies. That changes the conversation, because suddenly this is not just about who makes the roster. It is about whether one of these players could emerge as a legitimate contributor over time. And imagine if two make the roster again. That would reinforce what we have seen before. New England still knows how to find value where others miss it. That is why rookie minicamp becomes so important. That is why every rep in camp matters, because for these players, one breakout stretch can change everything. And do not be shocked if one of the biggest stories from this rookie group months from now is not even a drafted player, but an undrafted signing everyone overlooked in April. That is what makes this so fascinating, because while people are still grading the Patriots draft, another storyline may already be quietly forming behind the scenes, and it could end up producing one of the biggest surprises of the offseason. Now I want to hear from you. Which undrafted free agent do you believe has the best chance to make the 53-man roster? And could this class produce another hidden Patriots gem? Drop your thoughts below, hit subscribe if you enjoyed this breakdown, leave a like, and check out the video on your screen right now for more Patriots updates. And there's one more angle to this that could make this story even bigger, because roster spots are one thing, but impact is something else entirely. Making the 53-man roster would already be a huge win for these undrafted players, but what if one of them becomes more than just a surprise survivor? What if one of them actually earns snaps? That is where Patriots fans should really pay attention, because if Jacob Risey keeps building momentum, we may not just be talking about a developmental lineman anymore. We may be talking about a player who could push his way into meaningful depth conversations sooner than expected. Offensive line battles are often decided quietly, away from the spotlight, but they can completely reshape a roster. And if he keeps validating what the metrics suggest, this could turn into one of the steals of the entire rookie class. And imagine Kyle Dixon starts producing in camp the way he produced in college. That creates real pressure. Wide receiver competition is never static. It changes fast. One overlooked rookie making plays every day can force coaches to reconsider everything. Those are the stories fans fall in love with during the summer. And honestly, that possibility is what makes this group so different, because this doesn't feel like a collection of long shots. It feels like a collection of opportunities. Channing Canada could become a depth piece that sticks. Dorner could emerge as a reliable possession target. A player like Miles Montgomery could fight his way into special teams consideration and stay alive that way. There are multiple paths here. And that is where the Patriots often operate differently than other teams. They do not always look for immediate stars. Sometimes they look for traits they can mold. And if that is what happened here, then this undrafted class may be getting underestimated right now. What also stands out is how much competition this creates for the back end of the roster. That is healthy for a rebuilding team. It raises standards. It pushes veterans. It gives coaches harder decisions. And often those hard decisions mean the roster is improving. That is why I keep coming back to the bigger question. Did the Patriots quietly win in the undrafted market? Because if even one of these names develops into a contributor, this entire conversation looks different by mid-season. And maybe months from now, people will look back and say, while everyone was focused on the draft picks, the real hidden value was showing up after the draft ended. That would be classic Patriots. And honestly, it would not be shocking, because history says somebody from this group has a chance to break through. The only question is who? Is it the polished lineman in Jacob Rizzi? Is it the underdog playmaker in Kyle Dixon? Is it the athletic corner in Channing Canada? Or is there a sleeper nobody is talking about yet who ends up shocking everyone? That is what makes this worth following all the way through camp, because this story may just be getting started. And here's why this could become even more important than people realize, because once pads come on and real competition starts, reputations mean very little. Production starts speaking louder than projections, and that is where undrafted players can completely change the conversation. Every summer, there is always a player who goes from camp flyer to serious roster candidate, and sometimes that player forces his way into the team's long-term plans. That is the path these players are chasing right now. And with Jacob Rizzi, there is a legitimate reason people keep circling his name. Offensive line depth is never settled. Injuries hit. Rotations evolve. Coaches move players around. And if he keeps showing the discipline and technical consistency that showed up in college, he may become impossible to ignore. What started as an intriguing signing could become a real storyline. And think about how quickly momentum can shift for a player like Kyle Dixon. One preseason game with a couple explosive plays, and suddenly all eyes are on him. That is how these stories begin. Fans start talking, coaches take a longer look, national media notices, and before you know it, a player nobody expected is pushing into the roster picture. That possibility is very real here. And maybe what stands out most about this group is there seems to be multiple players with those kinds of pathways. Channing Canada has the athletic tools to fight for defensive depth. Cameron Dorner has the hands and production to make noise. Nick DeGennaro has traits that could help him carve out a role. Even some of the lesser discussed names could emerge once practices begin and roles start taking shape. And that is what makes the next phase so critical, because evaluation now shifts from paper to football.